Okay, everybody, welcome back to Nova Scribes. This is part of our Retooling You workshop. Today we are going to be talking about openers. And when I'm talking about openers, here's what I mean. So in the context of what we're talking about, an opener is the thing that you do to bring ideas into the room. So you could call this brainstorming, you could call this jamming on ideas, but it is sort of the left side of the good old divergence, convergence diamond. Okay, so we're going to be focusing right here with those things that you can do to bring ideas into the room. We call those openers. Okay. Um, and that's it. So the way that we're going to do this like functionally is that I'm just going to be like sketching some things out. Let me actually go ahead and share my screen so it's a little bit easier to see. Yeah, we'll go like that. And you can follow along. If you're a natural note taker, you may want to take notes. Or if you just want to kind of kick back and watch this one, this is fine. I may be calling in some favors to get some people to help me actually do these things. Okay. I'm going to get through as many of these as I can in an hour. So it's going to be a bit of a sprint. Our goal, how many different ways can you encourage folks to bring ideas into the room? Let's start with the basics of this one. We'll start with the kind of the classic brainstorming. Okay. A lot of people don't know this, but brainstorming has not been around for forever. It was invented by this gentleman by the name of Alex Osborne. And he had 4 rules of brainstorming. First of all, no judgment or criticism. So the idea is to just get ideas out into the room. Number 2, it was to be freewheeling. In other words, the more wild the idea, the better. Okay. Number 3 was to go for quantity. So the more ideas, the better. And then number 4, it was to build on the ideas of others. So this is the whole yes and. Okay. So those are what I would call, that's the classic rules of brainstorming. Now, I will also say that in her book, Quiet, Susan Cain criticized this a little bit. And what she was talking about was verbal brainstorming. What she pushed back against was, first of all, this first one, which is no judgment. She said, and I think rightly so, that we are judging creatures. We automatically judge. If we were not good at judging, we would never be able to decide what we wanted for breakfast in the morning. Judging is part of how we get through life. We have to make decisions every day. So it's very difficult to say no judgment. The other thing is that if we're doing brainstorming verbally, as often happens in the room, there's 2 kind of side effects of that. One of them is what's called production blocking. One person talks, that prohibits everybody else from talking. They're waiting patiently, hopefully, maybe it's impatiently, for them to, shut up so that they can say their piece. And then as a result of the production blocking, you get what's called social loafing. Oh, here goes Bob again. He's just going to run his mouth off. So I'm going to sit back and go into passive receive mode. And that's called social loafing. So we can get around those problems of brainstorming by introducing some of the methods of the graphic practice, of the visual practice, by like writing things down. Okay. So if we go from verbal to written brainstorming, we actually get around those problems that Susan Cain mentions. And one of the ways you can do that is by doing one of my favorite ways of bringing ideas into the room. And it's called a think, write, share. By the way, I'm going to give credit where credit is due. I first heard about think, write, share from the U.S. Army Red Team, the University of Foreign Military and Cultural Studies. And the way that it works is that you give people 60 seconds to do nothing but think about a problem, a prompt, something that you've got out there. You say, hey, when was the last time that you had 60 seconds uninterrupted to do nothing but think about it? So you give them 60 seconds to think about whatever. What does a successful team look like? What are going to be the initiatives that guarantee our success as an organization? Whatever ties back to your purpose. 60 seconds to do nothing but think about it. Okay. You start a timer. And then they get 60 seconds to write down their ideas. And traditionally, this is, said so often that you could put it on a t-shirt, 1 idea per sticky. So you pass out the sticky notes and they write one idea per sticky and they say, okay, well, if the question is, where might we go to lunch? We get back Taco Bell, Burger King, Chipotle, Shoba's house, whatever, you get these ideas that come back. And then you give them 60 seconds to read their ideas. Now, usually what happens is people just, as you want them to do, just quickly read through these sticky notes one after the other. So the sticky notes are a bit of a forcing function. There's only so much that you can fit onto a small square of paper. So people are going to be concise. They're going to be brief. And if the idea is to go for quantity and to get as many ideas into the room, Think, Write, Share is a great way to do that. By the way, before we get off of Think, Write, Share, let me tell you another thing that it can do that's really, really cool. I don't know if you've ever been in the unenviable position of having to facilitate an open conversation or something that was participatory immediately following a long presentation. Nobody wants to be in the position to, after an hour-long presentation and then the speaker says, are there any questions? Right? You get crickets, right? Nobody can, people get shocked by that. So what Think, Write, Share does is that rather than just like flipping on the lights to engagement, which can be a little bit shocking, it warms people up to go from that passive receive mode following a long presentation to now active participation mode. Okay. So Think, Write, Share, I like to put that one out there first because it's my favorite way for bringing in ideas. Okay. Let's do a few more. And by the way, if you've got any questions, queries, comments, I do have my eye on the participant window. You can just go ahead and go on mute like Christina just did. I'll see it and then I'll call on you. So Christina, what's up?
We use the same technique in a virtual reality environment that I work in for Goop. And so what happens is that we have these templates that are up on a board, and we do the same thing where you're thinking, and then we're posting up our stickies. And when we write in full sentences, however, one idea per sticky. And so we do all of that in silence. And then we step back and then we start to talk about what's on the board and we start to group them together as a group while we're talking. So we start moving the stickies all around and then start talking about them in groups. So awesome to see that written out like that. I hadn't realized that's what we were doing.
Yep, and that's the next step, Christina, usually with all of these things, is to then to do actually one of two things. Would be to do some affinitization or clustering. Affinitization is sort of a 50-cent word, but it'll help you pass your SATs. The idea is that let's group these things together, okay? That's one thing that you do once you've got these ideas. We're past the opening phase and now we're into like the refining phase. The other thing that I think is important to do, and we're not going to talk about it too much here, but it's to draw out information, okay? So to go back to this, and if Shoba says, hey, let's go to Taco Bell, if I've never heard of Taco Bell, I need a little context. Hey, Shoba, tell me what Taco Bell is, right? And so she tells me that. There's got to be a moment where it goes from the idea to understanding. But again, that happens kind of after the opening side. Now, one of the things that you said, Christina, that I really like is to use a visual template to help bring ideas into the room. And there's a bazillion visual templates that you can use. I'll give you just like a couple of resources where you can get some. One of them, of course, is the Grove's strategic visioning cards, okay? Those are cards that you can use for strategic planning. Another resource that I really like is this book called Design a Better Business. Kind of half semi-invisible here. Design a Better Business by, among other people, Lisa K. Solomon. And what's cool about this one is that not only are there some really amazing canvases, visual templates that are in there that you can draw from, but Lisa was one of the few people to get a license from the Grove to recreate a bunch of their strategic visioning templates in here. So if you go into this and you check it out, that is the cover story vision, okay? Very, very rare that you would see a Grove template in somebody else's publication, but here it is, okay? But yeah, visual templates are another great way to do it. We could do a whole class on visual templates. I'll just do a light touch on it here. Let me do some of the tried and true ways of bringing some ideas into the room. And again, I'll credit it where I can. Another one is to do what's called a 90-second serial share. Okay. Now this one, I think was first like codified by a gentleman by the name of Joe Gerstant. And he has done a ton of work around the real value, the ROI, what's the bang for the buck of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Not from a values perspective, not from an identity perspective, but here's the real ding that it makes to your bottom line. Okay. And so what a 90-second serial share is that we start with a person, okay? They have 90 seconds uninterrupted to share their ideas, talk about their perspective, talk about the pros and cons, and then it goes on to the next person who does the same thing. Uninterrupted, this is not dialogue, this is not debate, this is not discourse, this is one person stating their position, advocating their position, right? And then we move on and we hear to the next, we hear from the next person. You may have heard this as a round robin. Same thing. You may have also heard this, if you're kind of on the West Coast, as a go around. I don't know why this is, but I find that most East Coast facilitators call this a round robin. Most West Coast facilitators call this a go around. I didn't know there's a language divide on either side of the Mississippi, but there it is. So, however you do it, it is bringing all ideas into the room. Okay, we're going to hear from, Larry, Mo, and Curly, and we'll go in this order. And so you could call that a 90-second serial share if you like. Now, functionally, you never need 90 seconds. People usually say their piece and they're ready to move on. Okay. The whole hour is going to be like this. I'm just going to keep jamming until you tell me not to. Shall we keep going? All right, let's do another. Here we go. It's one way to bring ideas in the room. I got to get my favorite one in here. Now I'm going to need a little bit of help on this one. So whoever would like to participate, just feel free to go off mute. Let's figure out where we're going to go have lunch. All right. Where should we have lunch? And who's got some ideas around that? Just go ahead and call them out. We'll do this kind of like traditional verbal brainstorming. Where might we go to lunch? Who's got an idea? You got to go off mute at some point.
I said
Okay.
Buc-ee's.
Buc-ee's. All right. So we'll do Buc-ee's. What kind of food is Buc-ee's? Just so I know.
I have no idea. I just heard about it.
Can anybody help with that? What kind of food is Buc-ee's?
I think
Thanks, Shova, for throwing something in there that we can't, we don't know.
I'll look it up quickly.
Look it up for me. Karen, what do you got?
Well, I was thinking paisanos, which is pizza and subs.
Okay, so paisano. What kind of food is paisanos?
Pizza and subs, that kind of thing.
Pizza, subs. Okay, so maybe something with a little bit of an Italian flair to it. Okay. Who's got Shoba? What's Buc-ee's?
Barbecue.
Barbecue. Okay, so barbecue. Let's stay on barbecue for a second. Any other barbecue ideas? Yeah, okay, so Willard's. We're in the Northern Virginia area. If you haven't had Willard's, you're missing out. Feel free to just go off mute. You can name these. You can drop them into chat if you want to. Mission Barbecue is another one that we've got here. And how about around like the pizza subs Italians? Any ideas on that one? Yeah, okay, so I see one, Firehouse Subs. Okay, who else has got one? Subway, thank you very much.
Lido's.
Uno's, that's a good one. Okay, we'll throw Uno's in there. All right, let's go in a different direction. Mary Jo, just because you're off mute. Oh, you went on mute again. Give me something completely out of left field. What else could we do?
Salads.
Salad, okay, so where might we get a salad?
Nally Fresh.
Nally Fresh, okay. Any other ideas? Nally Fresh. Okay, I see one. Sweet Green, that's one. Mary Jo, what else you got?
Around salads.
Yeah.
Chopped.
Chopped. Okay, good one. We got chopped. All right. I think that's good enough. This is a mind map. A mind map is a radial network diagram. You start in the center with a core idea, a core theme, and then you branch outward. Now, as you can see, I was categorizing by type of food. Okay. The thing that I like about a mind map is that it's nonlinear. You can jump around. You can go in any direction. The other thing that I like about it is that it is self-organizing. So it doesn't matter what the group is throwing at you, you'll be able to handle it. Mind maps were, I would say, invented, probably more accurately to say codified, by Tony Buzan. And Tony Buzan was a real interesting guy. So he really focused on memory, okay? His thing was about having people like remember like long strings of numbers and, people in the audience, like audience names. So the idea with a mind map is that there's going to be order to it. There's going to be hierarchy to it. It's a great idea to add icons to it. Let's see if I can do a barbecue. Yeah, maybe like a chicken wing, chicken leg. Pizza, that's easy. It's a triangle. So you're going to add icons, add images. Should be fun, should be colorful. The idea is that this is encouraging people to be creative. This is probably a little indecorous, but I think of mind maps as sort of the gateway drug to graphic facilitation. You start with something like this, and then before you know it, you're drawing in front of 200 people. Okay, mind maps. That's a great way of bringing ideas into the room. Any thoughts about this one before we move on? Okay, let's do another one. You asked for it. Here we go. Let's do brain writing. Anybody know this one? Brain writing. So the idea with brain writing, kind of like brainstorming, but a little bit different, is that you have everybody grab a piece of paper, and at the top of that paper, you write a question or a challenge or a problem that they've got, some sort of prompt that's there, an issue, a challenge, a question, whatever it is. And then you pass that paper on to the next person who writes underneath that question a solution, an answer, a resource, a possibility, and you just push this thing down the line to the next person who writes the next thing. That's 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then so forth until you get to the end, or you fill up the paper, whichever comes first. And then it goes back to the initial person. Okay, so now they've got a whole string of ideas. They've got a whole bunch of different solutions and ideas for things that they might do. That's the baseline. That's the sort of the most basic way of doing brain writing. Let's do a couple of variations on it. I think it's a really good idea for the people who are writing answers to also write their names after it. First person says, "Where should we go to lunch?" Shoba says, "Taco Bell." When that list comes back to me, I'm like, "Shoba, what's with Taco Bell? Is there something that you know that I don't know?" Like, I can follow up with her and she can tell me more about Taco Bell. So I think it's a good idea to write names after that thing. Alternatively, what you can do is you can, in lieu of just passing papers back around the room, you can put these things on flip charts, okay, and hang them around the room like this. You put them on flip charts, you hang them around the room, same format, question, and then people wander around, gallery walk style, and they follow their energy. So same thing, they write down answers with their names after it. And this is kind of fun because it's a good way of like bringing a lot of ideas into the room. It's a way of doing some non-linear conversations, of bringing a lot of ideas in. I first heard about this variation from Ray Ringel. Some of you may know her, Ringel, and she called it asset mapping in this way. ASSET mapping, asset mapping. If you do brain writing the same way using big flip charts. And I really love this, especially if my client has said, we want people to connect with each other one-on-one. We have a large organization, or we've got an organization that's siloed, and we want people to be more collaborative. This is a great way to model collaborative behavior. Brain writing, if you do it small, asset mapping, if you do it big on flip charts. Okay. Let's keep going, shall we? And just go off mute, stop me if you want to percolate, ask questions about any of these things. Let's do another one. I just love this one. This one's like permission to give people space to be creative. So it's called endless white space. What you do is you get a very big piece of paper. Where do you find this piece of paper? Well, usually it comes on a roll, okay? And you unroll it and you tape it up, okay? And you give people all kinds of arts and crafts supplies. Okay, goes way beyond markers with this one. You give them magazines, scissors, tape, glue, whatever they can, and you say, you know what, this is endless white space for you to populate with your ideas, your dreams, your aspirations. So this is like combination graphic recording / wisdom wall / graffiti wall / minimum viable product / paper prototype. It's just like open space for people to fill up with their stuff. Okay. It's generally unstructured. You could have people go through and show some appreciations with like some dot votes or give them some star stickers. But this is just kind of the idea is to post everything. Let's get it all out there. And again, everything like with a purpose that relates back to, why you all got together. What's the purpose of this meeting? Okay. Shall we keep going? Let's keep going. All right. There's a tricky move in some facilitations where you take people from the as is to the to be. Okay. One way of thinking about this is the method that's called future search. And I'm just telling Karen that because, she's kind of our resident, anthropologist when it comes to facilitation methods. But you check out future search, there's a lot written about this. The problem is that it's really, really difficult to answer the question, hey, what does your future look like 10 years from now? You do that, you get the deer in the headlights. People freeze up. They're like, huh, I can't do it, right? It's really, really difficult. So one way that you can get people into a future mindset where they're really picturing what the future looks like is to do what's called guided imagery. Has anybody ever done guided imagery before? Yep, seeing a lot of nods. So Karen, Shoba, Hermika, Julie. Yep, you've all done that one. Okay, so if you have, you're probably thinking, hey, Brian, that's not visual. And I would argue, yeah, it is. It's just happening inside people's heads. If you haven't done guided imagery, here's how it works. Find yourself a good script for what's called a body scan. You have people sit down, you have them relax, they close their eyes, they focus on their breathing, and they bring mindful attention to their body, usually starting with the soles of their feet and working all the way up to the top of their head. And it's just a way of grounding people in their bodies, in their space. So it starts with a body scan. Let me write that down. By the way, you can do body scans just for the sake of doing body scans. They don't have to be attached to guided imagery, but it's a great way to get into a guided imagery situation. Once you do the body scan, then you do your absolute best to paint a picture of what that future is and what it looks like. You might do something like this. As you are coming into your body, I want you to imagine yourself 10 years from now. We have been wildly successful in achieving all of the strategic initiatives that we are yet to plan. We are living our dream. We're living our ikigai, our purpose. Think about what difference this would make to our employees, our shareholders, our key constituents, our vendors, our suppliers. What are we doing in this space? How are we showing up that's different? So you ask a lot of kind of open-ended questions that get them to really visualize what it is that future looks like. Okay. I think a couple of things are important when you're doing guided imagery. First, it's to reassure them. Okay. We just did a thing on energizers a few minutes ago where I said it's important to own this, right? And what I mean by that is that I've seen a lot of facilitators who kick off guided imagery and they say things like, okay, we're going to ask you to close your eyes and it's going to feel awkward and you're going to hate it, but let's just power through it. Don't do that. Just set it up, just set it up and get out of the way. Just own this thing. You have to feel confident. Otherwise your participants never will. But to reassure folks, to bring some mindfulness into it, to, use your voice, bring it down a notch. You may have been like high energy. This is a time to really calm things down, be rhythmic, and to pick a specific point in time. It's going to be 10 years from now or 5 years from now or 20 years from now. And to use those open-ended questions and really encouraging your participants to paint a mental image of that future. what does that future look like? Okay. And that's guided imagery. From there, you can go into any sort of strategic visioning methods where it's like, okay, let's come up with a mandala. Let's come up with a, let's do a cover story. Or let's do headlines from the future, or any of those methods that really, create that future vision. Guided imagery. Let's do another one. Let's do one that's a little bit more in the virtual space. Again, if you're, Shob, I just saw your correction. Bucky's with an E. Bucky's, got it. Here's one that you can do virtually. I guess you could do it in the room, but it's really, really great virtually. I don't remember where I heard it from, but it's called a bullet storm. And the way that it works is that first of all, you open up a Google Doc or any sort of collaborative writing app. It can be a SharePoint doc. If everybody's in the same organization, they can easily get into it. I think Google makes this the easiest, but you may have something else. Some sort of collaborative writing app. And so the idea is to have folks capture as many ideas as possible in a bulleted list, okay? This works both in person and remote. Occasionally I've had people do this, in the room if they have their laptops with them, where they will just jam on ideas. Now, the nice thing about this is that once it's in a Google Doc, you can do a lot of things that otherwise we would have to transcribe all those dang sticky notes for, like passing it through a little bit of AI to say, hey, what are the categories here? What are the themes that we're seeing? What's the frequency with which we're seeing certain ideas? Now, I got to tell you, when I suggest this, I will almost always get a client who says, yeah, but wait a minute. If everybody can see everybody else's ideas, it's not just this, but if everybody can see everybody else's ideas, won't they copy off of each other? And you say, yes, that's called collaboration. That's great. That's a good thing. They're building on each other's ideas. I think a lot of people are trained to think of that as cheating. Cheating is just another word for an assumed constraint that you've ran into. You know that it's there. All right, let's do a couple more. Let's see, we've done brainstorming. Let's turn that one over. We just talked about guided imagery. Let's do one that's related to that one. So this one is called Postcards from the Future. Postcards. Yep, word clouds are great for that one, Julie. I couldn't agree more. Postcards from the Future. Now, at this point, I should say your group should be pretty comfortable in whatever way making marks on paper. I wouldn't spring this on them. You've done an energizer that's gotten them drawing a little bit, but they're comfortable doing some simple icons. But here's how this goes. You give them one of those big index cards, like a 5x7, and you say, okay, we want you to write a postcard from your future self, from the perspective of your future self. So maybe we've just done that guided imagery thing. You are living that future. In fact, you are living it so well and you're loving life so much that we want you to write your present day self a postcard. So on the front of this thing, you're going to draw an image of what that future is. Yay. And then on the other side, you're going to write the text. Camp was great, whatever that is. So that's postcards from the future. By the way, this and any of these things, you can share it in the usual way. You can do a go around. You could, do popcorn. Not everybody has to share this. If you're just trying to get attributes of whatever that future is, you could do paired share or sharing at your tables. But in some way, you're going to want to get these ideas out into the open space. Okay. Speaking of open space, let's do one of my favorites. Open space. All right. A little bit of history. Anybody, show of hands, anybody here heard of open space technology or done open space technology? Okay, Karen's done it. Hermika's done it. Shob, I know Shoba's done it. Shoba's probably helped write the book on it. Okay, so open space technology. Open space was designed by Harrison Owen. And he came up with it looking at, quite frankly, indigenous peoples and the way that they got stuff done. Everything, I think that the example that he used was how do you get a party together? And there was this just kind of an organic way of making it work. But open space works because it has 4 principles. So principle 1, whoever comes are the right people to be there. Principle 2, whatever happens is the only thing that could happen. Principle 3, whenever it starts is the right time for it to start. 4, and whenever it's over is the right time for it to be over. I'll explain what I mean by that in just a minute, but those are the 4 principles that you start with. There's also one law, okay? And that is the law of 2 feet. And the way that the law of 2 feet goes is that if for some reason the conversation that you happen to find yourself in has reached diminishing returns, the law of 2 feet frees you of the social awkwardness of being stuck in a conversation where you're not getting any return. If that happens, you use your 2 feet to stand up, say thank you, and then find yourself in another conversation, okay? And you set that up explicitly so that people can move in and out of the space that's there, okay? So the way that open space works is that you create a community bulletin board, okay? And usually there's, stations at the top of it, A, B, C, D, E, F, something like that. And those stations that are on your community bulletin board correspond to places around the room. Maybe you've got a big poster or a flip chart up that says, here's A, here's B, here's C. And then what you do is you turn over the design of the agenda to the participants who are in the room. And so, maybe I'm picking just kind of a banal topic, so we've got something to work with, but it's like, okay, what's important to where we go to eat, okay? And let's say that Shobha says, all right, well, what's important to me is that we provide vegetarian options. It's like, okay, A is going to be about the veggies. So if people want to talk about that, they can go over here. And then, Karen stands up and she says, well, what's important to me is that it's close by. So, you can do like that. All right, this is about close. Probably a bad example. Let's do something that's a little bit better, something that's a little bit more realistic. Let's say you're doing something like, I don't know, a strategic plan, right? Some big juicy topic. And in the strategic plan, somebody says, okay, well, I've got this idea about how we might engage the workforce. Ooh, that's a good one. Somebody else says, well, I really care about AI. I want to talk about AI. All right, so we'll put that one over there. And then somebody else says, well, okay, I also want to talk about maybe the political climate that we find ourselves in. That's a juicy topic. In fact, I should take a step back and say the way that open space works is that the purpose, what brings people together, has got to be compelling, okay? If it's something that nobody cares about, it will have no energy. Open space works if people actually care about why they're there. If people don't care about why it's there, open space doesn't work. But if they honestly care about it, if you've got a compelling enough reason, they care and it works really well. One of the first open spaces that I was ever a part of was 3 federal agencies that were coming together for the first time. And the challenge was, how do we make this work? The best one I was ever a part of was the city of Houston, Texas. And they said, how do we fix homelessness? That was a very, very compelling reason. We had people, it was a cross section from across the room. We could do a whole session on open space. By the way, open space itself is one of the liberating structures. So you can get kind of the summary. If you go to the Liberating Structures website, it does detail how to do open space in there. But I find it to be a great way of just bringing ideas into the room too. Speaking of liberating structures, let me give you a couple of my favorites for bringing ideas into the room. 1, 2, 4, all. That's a great one. So the traditional format for 1, 2, 4, all is you've got 1 minute of individual reflection, okay? I usually like to couple that with a little bit of writing or journaling, similar to a think, write, share, okay? So 1 minute of individual reflection, journaling, writing, 1 idea per sticky note, you get the idea, okay? So this is at the individual level, that's the 1. Then we go to 2, where it's pick a partner and discuss, okay? So share your ideas, discuss. Now, some versions of 1, 2, 4, all will have you pick the best idea. I don't necessarily like to do that at this moment, but it's up to you. If you want to do kind of like a, like a Final Four, like a championship type thing, and like the best idea percolates up. At this moment, I usually like to bring in as many ideas as possible. So it's just like, okay, this is a chance to like share your idea and talk about it. So the 2 is you discuss in pairs. The 4 is the pairs find another pair, and then they share their ideas. And then ultimately you bring it up to the large group. That's the all. So 1, 2, 4 all, where you do a whole group harvest. Okay. By the way, let me also say that 1, 2, 4 all, just because you go from individual reflection to small group conversations to large group conversations is a great way also, like Think Right Share, to shift people out of the mindset from individual reflection or passive receive into now participation and engagement, right? It's another way of getting over the crickets from, are there any questions? So if you've had a long, drawn out speaker who's just running their yap, similarly to the way that I've been doing, and you need to get people participating, 1, 2, 4 all is a great way to do that. Okay. Shall we keep going? Questions, queries, comments? All right. Boy, y'all are hanging with me. Bitter end. Let's do it. Let's do a couple more. Okay. This is a good one. This one's got a few different names. Lately, I've started calling it a wisdom wall. This one is kind of close to the endless white space, except it's a little bit more directed. Endless white space is just like, take it in any direction. A wisdom wall is more targeted, okay? And with a wisdom wall, what you've got is a series of good open-ended questions that anybody should be able to answer, okay? So when I say open-ended questions, I'm talking about questions that cannot be answered in yes or no or one word. I'm talking about questions that, you know, people have to kind of reach and think about in order to get at. They should also be the kinds of questions that anybody in the room should be able to answer. And what that means is that they're not overly technical, okay? Actually, I'll tell you what, let me show you an example of a wisdom wall. I think I've got one handy if my computer decides to work with me, and it doesn't always. All right, little context here on this one. Nope, my computer's not going to work. So we're going to make it work. Hang on a second. Yeah. This happened to be for an organization called One Table, okay? And they're based out in New York City. And what they do is that they bring together Jews who are single and are too far away from family to go and enjoy Shabbat dinner, okay? And so it was held at a place called Peoplehood. And what we did is we asked them 4 questions. What are you bringing into the space? Good open-ended question. Anybody could answer that. What are you leaving behind? What does Shabbat taste like to you? I thought that was really kind of an odd question, but we went with it. And then the last one was, who are your favorite people to spend Shabbat with? Okay. And functionally, the way that this worked is that, you know, people came into the room, they saw this thing, and then they wrote down their answers on sticky notes. The sticky notes went up onto the wisdom wall. And then me and my sweet time, all I had to do was to take them down, transcribe it, and draw a little picture next to it, okay? This is like easy graphic recording because there's no time pressure here, and I don't have to remember anything. I got to tell you, if it comes down to doing a high-pressure graphic recording where people throwing 20 ideas at me versus doing a wisdom wall, I'll do a wisdom wall any day. They're easy. So that's how it works. You transcribe and you illustrate their answers if you're feeling up to it. You could use this to harvest, for example, a world cafe, which we'll talk about in a minute. You could use this as like one-on-one facilitation. So maybe you've got somebody who's out there who's like, you know, walking around the group and they're asking questions like, hey, what are you bringing into this space? They write it down, they bring you the card. Another way to do it is that this could be totally participant driven and you don't even need to have a facilitator, well, facilitating it. Let me show you what that looks like just so you can see it. What's scary about this is that it depends on how good my organization skills are. All right, here we go. Non-facilitated wisdom wall might look something like this, okay? These are kind of long. I wouldn't do prompts that are this big, but you know, that's what they wanted, so that's what we went with. What crucial conversations around equity and inclusion do you think we need to have that we are not having? That's too long. That could have been tightened up. And as you can tell, at the end of the day, there weren't a whole lot of hits on this thing. But what you can do is, you post it out there like that, and hopefully it's in a high enough traffic place that this runs by itself without a facilitator. As long as I'm showing off a wisdom wall, people really like it. They can use it like a step and repeat to do selfies in front of, so this is another example of a wisdom wall that's there. Sometimes you hear these called knowledge walls or also graffiti walls. They're all correct. Okay. Shall we keep going? You want more? Good grief, you guys. Tough to satisfy. All right, let's do some more. Let's see, we talked about a wisdom wall. Nice. Let's do this one. This one's, oh yeah. All right, I said I'd talk about it. Let's do it. World Cafe. Anybody here done a World Cafe before? Yeah, okay. Karen has, Shobha has, Hermika has, Mary Jo has. Few people did not, so we'll go through it. So the idea with the World Cafe, by the way, credit where credit was due, was designed by Juanita Brown and David Isaacson, I think. I think I got that right. Shobha's giving me the thumbs up, and Shobha knows. So yeah. So the way that it works with the World Cafe, I'm going to keep it really simple. Let's say that you've got, I don't know, 18 people. Okay. You take 6 of those people and you put them each at a table. Okay, you get the idea. 6 of those people at a table, 6 of those people at a table. And then at that table, you have a question. So question 1, question 2, question 3. Okay. Again, like the wisdom wall, this is going to be a good open-ended question that anybody in the room could answer. You set it up and you say, okay, go ahead and have a conversation, and then people talk at their tables, talking about that prompt, answering that question, whichever one it was. Now, the way that I like to do World Cafe, and there's a lot of variations on this, but the way that I like to do it is that you pick someone who is going to be your table host, and the table host remains behind. And then everybody else rotates to the next question. Okay, they do a bit of a circuit. And what happens is that the host welcomes the new people in to say, nice to have you here. Here's what the last group discussed. And then ideally, the new group picks up right where the last group left off. And you do this until everybody has a chance to touch every question. So a couple of variations on this. I think it's a really good idea to have a large paper tablecloth so that participants can write their answers down. Makes it a lot easier for the table host to remember and for the new groups to see what they talked about. So I like the convention of having like a large piece of paper that people can like just write down their thoughts on this thing. Another thing is, by the way, this is not necessarily the way that, and Shobha, you would know better than I would because I didn't work with them, but this is not necessarily the way that Juanita Brown and David Isaacson came up with it. When they did it, it was a little bit more freeform. It was a little bit more, you can kind of like wander around. It feels a little bit looser. Maybe you have like flowers on the table. You bring in a little bit of like the art of gathering, and there's some like French music that's playing, maybe some gingham sheets. Who knows? There's like, you're trying to set the idea that this is like a cafe. At least in DC, I've gotten some pushback on that idea of openness. And so what I find is that my clients like the structure of, okay, we're going to move this group to this table and then this group to this table. They like that sense of a circuitous structure. They tend to get a little itchy if it's like, yeah, people are just going to mingle around and find their way, And I actually prefer it to do the more open way. But my clients tend to push back about that, especially if they've already pushed back on something like open space. So if like open space is too open for them, if it's too random, if it's too loose, I'm going to suggest a very structured World Cafe way of doing it. Okay. And again, there's a million variations on this. This is just one of the ways that I find that works. All right. Shall we keep going? Questions, queries, comments, posers, highlights, insights? No, nothing. All right. Gosh, we'll keep going. Let's do a kaleidoscope. This is a good one. We got about 12 minutes left. All right, kaleidoscope. How in the world do you spell kaleidoscope? If I get this wrong. Okay, very good. So a kaleidoscope, this is a few things. This could be an opener. It could also be an energizer. It could also be something that you might use for design thinking. But the idea is that you hand people some big stickies, so like the 4x6s or the 5x8s, like the large ones, and you give them a prompt that is, of course, related to your purpose for being there, your outcome of the meeting. It could be draw our future as an organization, or our operating environment, or our perfect culture. If we had a perfect culture, what would it be? What would it look like? If you're doing some individual leadership development work, it might be draw your leadership philosophy. If you're doing some team building, draw the best team that you're ever part of, whatever it is, right? But you give them a little bit of time to draw some simple shapes, and they give us a picture. Everybody draws big, and then we reinforce that all perspectives are valid, they are equal. We're not clustering here, we're not grouping here. So Christina, I'm going to go back on what I said before. This is one of the few things where you do an opener, but you don't cluster. What you do is you just bring all of the perspectives into the room, okay? And this goes on, right? And so, the idea here is that you're reinforcing that all perspectives are valid, that everybody's got a different lens on this idea, and that when we bring in these different perspectives, we get closer to the whole picture, okay? Again, that's called the kaleidoscope. There are a couple of really cool things that you can do with this. I think it's Neuland, I'm not sure. But one organization, and again, I think it's Neuland, but they actually make hexagonal sticky notes. I can't really draw a hexagon, but there it goes. And when you match those things up together, they have like a slightly different effect than just like the rectangular ones do, that ends up looking really, really, really cool when you do it in the room. Okay, so that one's called the kaleidoscope. Shall we keep going? I still got you for 10 minutes. All right, you guys are doing good. Here's another opener. So remember, an opener, the whole purpose of an opener is to bring ideas into the room. A simple format to do that is to do what's called mirror, window, crystal ball. Anybody know this one? Oh, I got you. All right, nobody knows this one. Mirror, window, crystal ball. And so the way that this works is that the mirror is to take a look at ourselves, okay? This is how do we see ourselves? A couple of ways you can do that is you can ask people the classic questions. What are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? Okay. And again, with all of these, people are writing down their ideas on sticky notes. You could say, hey, what is our history, right? You could say, what is our current value proposition? You could say, what are we good at? I mean, I guess that's the same as strengths. But you want them to take a look at themselves, right? Depending on the purpose of your offsite. I'm doing it from the context of, like, let's say that this is some sort of organizational meeting, right? And we're thinking about the company in the abstract. You could do this just as easily with like a leadership development or an individual reflection where it's like, okay, let's have you assess your own fill in the blank. But that's the mirror. You look at yourself. The window is we're going to look outward. And again, in the organizational context, if we were doing something like a strategic plan, we would do something like an environmental scan or a context map. We would use those prompts, so to speak, right? This is sort of like a shorthand to be able to do those things, like coming short of actually doing a full-blown context map, where we'd ask people, hey, what are we seeing on the horizon in the industry with regards to things like technology? Actually, let me do it properly. With regards to things like the political environment or the economic environment or social environment, technological or legal or environmental. By the way, that's called PESTLE. I'll do it again. Political, economic, social, technological, legal, environmental. It's just a quick way of doing an environmental scan of trends that are happening in the environment. Okay. So you could do PESTLE. You could say, hey, what are our customer needs? In fact, you could walk through, I'm really geeking out hard on this one. You could walk through Porter's 5 forces, where you've got your, what are we seeing from our suppliers, our substitutes, which is to say, if they're not coming to us, who are they going to? New entrants, people who are new in the field, new in the industry, buyers, same thing as customers, and then competitors. But however you want to do it, this is an environmental lens. This is a look outward, competitors. Okay. And then the crystal ball. It's really hard to draw a crystal ball because it's just a circle. But the crystal ball is a look into the future. We've done that already. We could do like guided imagery in order to get us there. We could do postcards from the future. We didn't talk about it this time, but we could do something like a cover story vision. You have been so wildly successful that the magazine of your choice has decided to put you on the cover. But what mirror window crystal ball does is it's sort of a shorthand to some of those heavier modalities that I just named as a way of just saying, hey, let's create some sticky notes around this. What do we look like now? What does our environment look like? What do we think the future holds? All right. Let's pull one in. Let's pull one in from self-help, okay? So this one actually comes from The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Anybody ever read that one? If you do, you don't have to admit it. Okay, fine. Yeah, a lot of us have. So there's the idea of what are called the daily pages, okay? If you've read The Artist's Way, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If not, don't worry about it. This is 3 pages. Now, this is the way that it's prescribed, right? 3 pages of longhand, stream of consciousness, whatever, writing, drawing, painting, whatever's coming up for you. By the way, The Artist's Way it's a beautiful book. It's a way of really getting people around. Well, I think the 2 things that it solves, or it tries to solve, is artist block, and then the other side is addiction. Okay, I think that it's a really, really great resource for helping people get through some tough stuff. One of the practices being the daily pages is you just write. You know, you just get ideas out, and it's stream of consciousness. Now, the book calls for 3 pages. I think with a group, you can shorten that a little bit, and you can set it up to say, you know what, we just want you to get your ideas out there. So without judgment. We want you to do some free verse. We want you to do some stream of consciousness writing. Whatever's coming up for you with the proper prompts, again, ones that are related to your outcome, you just have people write. Fill a page, okay? And then maybe you have them go through it. You say, okay, what ideas does this bring up for you? Refine some of these ideas, share them with a partner, or keep them to yourself. But it's a good way of getting people to be a little bit more generative, a little more creative. Still with me? Can we fit one more in? I think we can fit one more in. You guys are amazing. Whew! All right, let's see. We're going to skip that one. We're going to skip that one. All right, we're going to get into some of the dark magic then. All right, this one comes from the red team, the U.S. Army red team, which is all about getting into the mind of the other guy, okay? This one's called 4 Ways of Seeing, okay? This is a little bit like the Johari window. Anybody know the Johari window? Yeah, Shobha does, Ramika does, Christina does. Okay. A little bit like that one. Julie smiled at me. I'm not sure if that's like, I'm just along with it or I know what it is. It's fine. Don't worry about it. So the 4 ways of seeing are like that, sort of like the Johari window. But if you have no idea what I'm talking about with that, that's fine. Here's how this works. So you have 2 parties that are involved with this one that you're thinking about. It could be, for example, your organization. It could be your organization and its biggest competitor. It could be your organization and its adversary. It could be like individual, like our team and our executives. But whoever else has the biggest source of gravity in the room. It's the them in the us versus them. Okay? So you figure out who those 2 parties are in the us versus them. What 4 ways of seeing does is it's a methodical approach to perspective taking. We're going to call those 2 different groups, X and Y, whoever they are. You can do it for anybody. So the first block is, how does X see itself? Okay. And then the next one is, how does Y see itself? What is their persona? What is their ego? What is the dog food that they are eating? I mean, I don't care. Use your metaphor, right? Like, how do they see themselves? Then you flip it and you say, okay, over here, how does X see Y? And then how does Y see X? Okay. Now, before you do this for real, I think it's a good idea to do this as an example with a group. Okay. And the reason I say that is it is very, very difficult to get people to abstract out of their own situation and to think about how they may be seen by others. Okay. Especially in the politics of a room. So I think it's a good idea to give them a couple of examples. Here's a few of my favorites. Eliot Ness and Al Capone. That's a good one. And pick a couple of rivals, Eliot Ness and Al Capone. Now, I got to say, the couple of times I've done that, people have not known who Al Capone and Eliot Ness were, and I was shocked. Shocked, I tell you. Another one you could do would be Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, right? Another one would be Coke and Pepsi, right? Another one could be Hamilton and Jefferson. You know, and if like all of those fall flat, if people are like, well, I just really don't know. It's like, okay, pick a rivalry that at least this culture could wrap their heads around. And we don't want it to be the real one yet. We wanted to pick something that's like external, pop media, safe, whatever, to practice on before they do this one for real. Okay. All right. Just to close on this, first of all, a couple things. Let me go ahead and stop the share. I will drop in the donation button into chat. Again, thank you very much. If you got anything out of this, buy me a cup of coffee. This goes right back into the meetup. We use it for scholarships. We use it for the meetup. We use it to, send people to IFEP. We also use it for honorariums for new graphic recorders who are just getting their start. So this doesn't, I'm kidding about the coffee. I don't actually, use it for that. So if you got anything out of this, just please click the button. The other thing that I would say with this is I think it's always a good idea to get these things down in writing, right? Just from the perspective of a visual facilitator, before giving people time to discuss, have them write down their ideas. As soon as people start talking, the conversation vectors in that direction, right? People build on each other's ideas, which is good. But if the first idea is pointing you in a direction, you may have missed all of the other directions that conversation could have gone. In other words, one idea per sticky note. Okay, and with that, let me go ahead and hit stop on the recording. If I can. It looks like the recording button is gone. Oh, there it is. Okay, here we go.